Hello. Thank you for coming along. Thanks for rolling the dice on this session, which is titled Automate Everything Become Irrelevant, and talking about the sort of next phase of media and where I think stuff is going. So my name's Luke Franks. I've been a presenter and a content creator for 10 years or so. I used to do I was the digital presenter for The X Factor and The Voice back in the day, which is a funny term because it doesn't really exist anymore, like a digital presenter, which we'll come on to in a second, and various things like that. I did Radio 1 for a while and various other bits, but now I kind of sit at the front of technology and help companies with AI, video particularly. So yeah, this is kind of my macro picture of what I think is where stuff is probably going. Starts with David Attenborough and a little harvest mouse, happy birthday David Attenborough, as a sort of symbol of probably what is the highest trust in the UK probably at the moment, somebody that everybody loves because they kind of trust him so much and he's built that over such a long time. So if we start with the old world, so when we think about broadcast TV and how it's developed and where we're going next, broadcast used to own the sort of whole stack of stuff. So they used to obviously own the production, the distribution across the channels, the discovery as well. If you wanted to get found, you kind of had to get the approval and acceptance of commissioners through to use their distribution platform and get discovered. And that was kind of my journey of the kids TV for a while, which doesn't exist, but that whole path has obviously completely changed now. It was interesting to see it. Legitimacy as well. If you made it onto TV and the main channels, you were legitimate, supposedly. And scarcity as well. Or another way, you could say that we sort of decided what gets made, what gets seen, what looks high quality, and what essentially is kind of true or valued in the world of media. Obviously very different now. There we go. Okay, so then obviously next came the kind of YouTube era. And I remember this really clearly because I had a TV agent at the time who was a lovely person. This was a long time ago, but very clearly said to me when I was kind of talking to him about YouTube, and I was like, I think this is probably going to be quite a big deal. And he was like, nah, it's not. Like, these kids in their bedrooms are never going to challenge anything, don't do that. And I was like, okay. And then we all know kind of what happened next. Not to throw shade at broadcast, I love it, but there's been obviously a huge shift. So YouTube and that era did a few things. It sort of first lowered that barrier to entry. Obviously anybody could create content online. Created these constant feedback loops as well that broadcast just doesn't have, in that it's sent out and received rather than the engagement, the comments, and the community element of YouTube. And that created intimacy, that way that you could speak back to people, reply to comments, turn up to live premieres of stuff. And obviously it kind of switched speed over polish in the sense of getting lots of content out. People stopped caring necessarily about the high production value, especially in the beginning. Obviously it's got better since, but it sort of changed the priority and the stack of stuff, and really pushed kind of personality over institution. And people didn't mind that stuff was raw and unfiltered and not polished and didn't look great if there was personality there, and that's what people loved. And I remember that being really interesting but really jarring at the time, because it was very different, and the previous industry kind of looked at it like, yeah, but we're the ones who kind of decide. And then over time, that market share switched, and there's value in both places, but obviously this was the journey we kind of went on. So sort of to summarise that, it disrupted access, distribution and trust, and I think that's coming again in a slightly different way. So the sort of epitome of the YouTube era, which is now obviously so established and everybody knows about, is the Sidemen charity match. They do a big football match every year at Wembley and sold out 80,000 seats. I think it was £6.5 million for charity, but quite a lot of people probably just didn't even know it existed. So it's just a crazy story, and it's no longer like a YouTube story, but more a technology story and a story about trust and culture shifting as well, which I think is actually the main thing. Alright, so here's what I think TV got wrong in that era. There I am doing X Factor stuff with somebody you probably don't remember, but she was very nice. But it was, the reason I have the picture is because, I had this, I got booked as this digital presenter. That kind of, I was online, I was on the X Factor YouTube channels, but they were sort of tried to shoot it like a TV show, and it was in that phase in between when everything was switching and people didn't really know how to use it or which way to go. So it was like, looking back, it was quite an interesting area. So here's what I think TV got wrong over that change. They treated digital content as marketing for broadcast, for the main show, instead of its own separate product, which is, now clearly stands on its own 2 feet since then. But we were very much at the bottom of that show, understandably, but really the YouTube channel, had billions and billions of views, and it was that moment where things were switching a bit, but people didn't really spot it. I think the industry treated creators as sort of promo units rather than native talent, which has obviously been evident kind of since. Tried to make new platforms behave like TV, which is a trend that always happens when technology shifts. When TV first came out, people tried to do radio shows on TV, that kind of thing. These aren't huge criticisms, just an observation looking back, which is obviously easier to do than at the time. I think the TV industry assumes that quality alone would win, and the best looking stuff would be the thing that got the most attention, which just wasn't true over time. And underestimated how much audience valued access and kind of frequency of content probably over quality. But they did get some things right, and I think TV and broadcast is in a really strong position for a few things going forward. So live events obviously still matter, things that need to be broadcast. I never really thought about it in that way coming through it because it was all that I knew, but now when I think about broadcast, there are a few things that really deserve and need to be broadcast from a central place out to everybody else. Live events are clearly one of those things, and it's clearly where everybody shows up to watch stuff like Radio 1's Big Weekend or Glastonbury or whatever it is. Shared moments still matter, and I think people really crave those, whether that's the family shows at the weekend or whether it's live sport or when there's big news events. Obviously everybody kind of flocks back to broadcast to feel this sense of camaraderie and understanding together. I think that's still really strong for broadcast. Editorial judgment obviously still matters in some of those huge moments. And production craft does still matter, although quality alone maybe doesn't have the premium that it used to. In certain scenarios, in big broadcast moments, obviously it is really important still. So in my mind, YouTube kind of revealed what broadcast was actually for in the first place. We just never really thought of it that way because that was the only thing that we had at the time. But now that the kind of marketplace has expanded, we get to think of it in a completely different way, and the sort of market share has split a little bit in different direction. Okay, so I think what's kind of interesting about that whole journey from broadcast through to online and YouTube is the path of technology generally, which does pretty much the same thing every time new technology comes in with a few kind of tweaks. So what tends to happen is that new technology begins to break a monopoly of some sort because it increases access to lots of people who didn't have access before. That sounds like a good thing, and it is a good thing in lots of ways. I think the incumbents suddenly feel that to be jarring, and a lot of the new people using the new technology, it's not very good at the start, but that's also the way that it often starts as well. So I think it starts there. Then culture kind of forms around the new medium in the pockets where people aren't really looking, or certainly the incumbents aren't really looking, but there is this new culture brewing, and it feels alien and it feels jarring. That was certainly the case with YouTube in the early days. The incumbents kind of misread that and often ignore it. It's like, oh, this might be silly, or this is not the level that we're at, or whatever it is. Then the kind of winners, or at least people who take some of the market share, build natively to the new rules. So YouTubers stuck to their YouTube roots, and it was raw, and it was authentic, and it wasn't polished, but that created a whole new industry with these new rules. And trust and culture gets rebuilt in a new way. So that's kind of where we are now. Both things exist. We talked about what broadcast is great at, but there is a whole new culture and a whole new sort of sense of trust as well, especially in the next generation coming up. I think they're probably less trusting of big institutional players, rightly or wrongly, is a completely different conversation, but that tends to be what happens when new technology breaks through, and it's the kind of classic thing of you don't really want to do what your parents did before you, so the new culture tends to rebel what the old culture was anyway. So again, it's disrupting access, distribution, and trust. So the classic sort of saying is that history doesn't repeat, but it often does rhyme. So now kind of looking forward to, I think, where we're heading now. So this is where AI comes in and what AI is changing, particularly for video and content creation. So again, it's changing who can make content. So these tools are very, very accessible to everybody, and they're reasonably cheap, really, for a lot of these things to start making content. And the tools, I think, now have got to a level where they are genuinely really useful. There's a whole separate debate about generated video content living, maybe carving out its own separate path as a separate category, just like YouTube did. I won't really necessarily talk about that much today, but I think the tools are getting to the point where that is inevitably going to happen in some form. Obviously, it's changing how fast content can be made. How many ideas can be tested is an interesting one, and like a really disruptive one to the current, even YouTube era, is that you can test so many things so quickly. You can make changes to various hooks or various bits of content or switch things around. It naturally changes the whole essence of content creation, and how cheaply formats can be prototyped. I think it's really interesting for broadcast stuff that you can, generate various different things and test things much faster than you ever could before. It also changes who now owns the production stack again. So it's funny now looking and talking to YouTuber mates who are now, they're feeling disrupted, like they sort of had the empire and now suddenly it's coming to them in various ways. And there's nuance to that, obviously, but it's just interesting to see it roll over again in the same way. And this is just a potentially stupid observation, but AI slop is the new cat videos of YouTube. Maybe that will look smart in 2 years, maybe that'll look dumb, but I do really clearly remember that YouTube era of, it's just full of like stupid people's cats, stupid videos of cats and stuff like that, in the same way as AI slop has been talked about. But I think it will change. Okay, let's talk about adoption quickly. So again, this is typically how new technology gets adopted. Small creators adopt first, like people and entities who have really nothing to lose and no risk to manage, which is what happens in the YouTube era. If you're a creator, you can put stuff out. It doesn't really matter if it's rubbish because who cares, but it might get attention if it's good. Experimental teams then begin to adopt it after them as well, and we're seeing that already now. I think like AI video particularly is most interesting for those kind of middle tier brands. If you're a huge brand, like Coca-Cola did do their Christmas campaign with AI to relatively negative feedback, because I think they have the ability to pay people properly for stuff. I don't think that's the core use case, at least right now, but if there's a middle tier brand that's growing with a small team and can start to make really big cinematic videos using AI, I think people are more sort of accepting of that, because it feels less sort of gross, doesn't it, that you're enabling a team to create cooler things and more creative things and bigger things that maybe couldn't have afforded to do it before. So it's that access thing versus huge corporates that could afford to pay more people anyway. Incumbents adopt later, but at scale is the next thing. So inevitably, the bigger corporations, bigger brands will adopt this stuff. It's just the incentives are too strong not to, and they'll do it at scale when they feel it's ready and have worked out what the response is. And audience norms will arrive after creative behaviour. So yeah, that's kind of the flow that I think is maybe halfway through at the moment. And eventually people, won't really know what is and what isn't AI, but we'll talk about the trust element in a moment. But essentially, yeah, it becomes the norms later. So when you see stuff now, I think it's just worth thinking, where is this going, rather than initially your reaction to what you see at the moment. Lots of us have seen bad AI videos, things that look really glossy and rubbish, but that's not where we're heading. There's some nuance with the trust stuff, so we'll talk about that. So again, access, distribution, and trust. So I would argue that trust really is the new premium. So some questions to think about in this new era. These are the things that people are asking me and go around in my group chats. Was this made by a person? What is real? What is synthetic? And do I care whether it is or not? It's like a really interesting question. It depends what it's for. What is manipulated? And what should I value now? I think everybody's wrestling with these questions why it feels so weird at the moment. Okay, this is just a quick, strange example or analogy that I've said to other people, and it's not perfect, but I think it sort of illustrates the point of, like, if you imagine if somebody is playing a electric keyboard like this, and they press the demo button, and it plays this perfect tune, like all the notes are perfectly in order. Yeah, it's not AI, it's just pre-programmed in. Nobody's really very impressed by that happening, even though it's perfect. But then if somebody was to walk in, a human was to walk in, sit down at that same piano, and play that same piece in front of you, you suddenly would be really impressed, even though the same thing has happened. You'd be like, well, that's amazing that you've got that skill. Then if it was, I don't know, a family member of yours that did that you didn't know they had that skill, you'd be even more impressed, because you have this emotional attachment to that human doing that thing, even though the exact same thing has happened 3 times in a row. So I think that's really important from a kind of human perspective about what we value, and I think that's kind of interesting in terms of AI content going forward. So humans care about humans, so I think it's really important to show your working going forward with content and shows. My argument is that the next trust signal is likely process visibility, so the transparency is part of the product when you're creating new content and new shows. So I think this is probably the opportunity for TV and broadly whatever that is becoming. This is the CEO of McDonald's, which is a weird example, but nobody really knew who he was, but he started making videos of him like eating the burgers, but he ate it in a really weird way and it went viral for kind of the wrong reasons. But the point is that he kind of is showing his face as part of the company. I'm not an advocate for McDonald's really, it's probably a bad example. The point is the CEO was showing his face and doing stuff. So I would argue that going forward, the audience relationship needs to begin much earlier than it currently does, especially with broadcast stuff. So rather than sort of launching the program and hoping the audience comes to you later, I would try and flip that round the exact opposite way and search for the audience, find the audience, connect with them way before you ever launch the program. And I think where possible, audience visible development is really key. So if you can possibly let the audience into your development process, which comes with obviously lots of questions, but is doable, and is what we see a lot with kind of YouTube and other stuff, I think that becomes really valuable for building trust. And if possible as well, to give your production teams faces and presence. If people can see them as part of the show and part of the working and part of the development, I think that's a really interesting way to go forward by helping people trust the type of stuff you're making at the very early stages in that process that has previously been completely hidden, especially for broadcast TV. So build in public where possible. These are some examples. I won't play the videos, but I don't know if you've seen the Premier League like POV ref cam. So you get to watch the conversation between the players that the ref is having with them, and they've gone super viral, and they're really interesting and really amazing watch, because you just let in on this other part of the process that has previously been completely hidden by the perfect shots and amazing quality of of production. But these little raw moments are so valuable, and I don't know, if you haven't seen them, maybe you should after. They're such an interesting watch. And I've also seen people do great sort of presenter videos recently about what they hear that you don't on TV when they're doing live broadcast. And it's fascinating because that process is really interesting to more people than you realise, when you're getting multiple cameras in your ears and countdowns and having to do stuff. And it's just letting the audience in on this process that I think they really want to know about, and really builds trust with that presenter doing it and that show doing it and that production doing it. Yeah, so that's kind of my item go forward. So things that you could think about are sort of writer's room windows, sharing some of the stuff, some of the ideas, some of the development en route to the program. Maybe casting diaries, live creative check-ins. Like if I was, I don't know, running a radio station or something now, like I would be on Instagram lives and Twitter lives like multiple times a week, talking about what's happening at the station, what we're thinking about music-wise, and just putting a presence of like these execs out there, because I just feel like that relationship is so far apart at the moment with broadcast, but you could quite easily let people in a controlled way. Also, to be vulnerable and share fails, version breakdowns, things that didn't work in your development process. People really want to see that. Like we're in a world where you can't really protect everything anymore, so don't I would share that stuff as much as you can with the audience. And more kind of lo-fi live streams, just stuff that we're not talking about new productions and massive expense here, just on your phone, showing that process more, a lot like especially the spots video. So yeah, exactly, stories that are raw, vulnerable and honest, which it's a really hard thing for people who have worked in broadcast to do, I think, because the whole package is kind of shiny and perfect, when actually I think the stuff that people are really going to want to crave in the future are these raw, vulnerable moments of things maybe failing, and kind of raw stories. So unpolished BTS. So some questions to ask when you're thinking about shows, then we'll wrap up. Who are the first 500 people for this idea, for this show, way before you're ever launching the idea? Where do they gather? Are they in communities online? Can you find them first and make them kind of part of your development and, not officially maybe development and production teams, but get ideas, share stuff with them, make them feel valued that they've had a part in the show? What could you give them maybe before launch as well? When we talk about community building, can you give them something special? What makes them feel early to your show rather than just marketed to after the fact? And I think nowadays you can't rely on owning the audience by default because it's so fractured, because it's everywhere, and because trust is breaking. You have to build that community first, and then they come to you. All right, we're almost done. So here's some objections that are completely valid, but probably spring to mind. But the budget. I'm not talking about more high-quality kind of BTS shows. Just more ground-level transparency, more low-budget moments, more human in the process, and audience visible development. But the NDAs, yes, but secrecy doesn't make it cool. I get, obviously, there's stuff to think about here. This isn't like a complete one-shot everything, but the fact just being secretive alone, if you can possibly not do that, I think that will really help you with your audience and community building. Because it does prevent attachment. Broadcast, I think, one of the problems it has is that it's quite far away from its audience at the moment because of the nature of the technology, but it's in a good position to change that as AI rips through everything and people don't know what's real. So less campaign thinking, less assets, and more presence. So to summarize, really, AI will make content abundant, but trust will make it valuable. Thanks very much.